Hey there, welcome to this episode of the Legal Paige podcast. Today's episode, I am sitting down with my legal team from the Legal Paige, Melissa and Taiyler. So Melissa is my legal associate who helps with all of our legal content at TLP. She also assists with our one-on-one clients at Griffith Law PLC, which is our virtual law firm. And Taiyler is our legal intern who helps primarily with blog posts and prepping legal podcasts. She is in her last year of law school, and we are so excited for her to officially become an attorney here soon. I really wanted to sit down as legal ladies today and just have a candid conversation about another legal lady that we are very fond of and saddened to hear of her passing, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who is better known as RBG or the notorious RBG. I wanted to give you all a bit of history about her biggest cases, the lasting impact she made on not only the legal world as us as female attorneys, but also the world as a whole and the nation and what she has done for our country. But also talk about some flaws in her legal career and her time on the bench. And then at the end of this episode, we three discuss the importance of using your right to vote and how elections really shape our cities that we live in, our states, and the whole of our country. So without further ado, let's dive in. This is a longer episode, but I promise there's so much good information and you're going to learn a ton in it. Let's do this, Legal Pagers. You're listening to the Legal Paige podcast, where we chat about life and business with a legal twist. I'm Paige, attorney and photographer helping online businesses and creatives tackle their business dreams without breaking out in hives. No more legal mumbo jumbo. This podcast features simple, bite-sized advice that'll have you legally legit in no time. Are you ready? Let's get started. Okay, you guys, thank you so much for tuning in today. As I mentioned in our intro, I am super excited because I have my legal ladies on today's episode, Melissa and Taiyler, who work for the Legal Paige and my virtual law firm, Griffith Law. We are here to discuss Ruth Bader Ginsburg, better known as RBG, and the lasting impact she had on all of us in the legal world as female attorneys in particular, and then how she had an impact on basically all of America. First, I wanted to just introduce these two. Melissa works for me as a legal associate, and then Taiyler works for me as well as a legal intern. I know them super well, but you two, I just want you to introduce yourselves to everybody here so they can get a little background on like what you do, why you do it, where you're from, kind of your background as a female in the legal world. So Melissa, why don't you go first?
Hi, everybody. I'm Melissa. I am the legal associate for the Legal Paige, which means I help with a lot of the legal content. I also work one-on-one with I help with some of the one-on-one for Griffith Law with those clients. I'm originally from Chicago, but I live in North Carolina now with my husband and my 3 dogs. And I'm also a little bit of a unicorn because I love photography. I have my own photography business and I love the law. So the Legal Paige is the perfect place. And I really enjoy seeing how the two worlds merge. And I went to law school in New Jersey, where Ruth Bader Ginsburg taught for a while. And honestly, she's one of my favorite people. So I'm super excited to talk about her today.
Yes, so am I. You guys, Melissa's one of my favorite humans ever. And her and I are kind of the main brains behind everything that comes out with the Legal Paige and all the legal content. She has helped tremendously with everything TLP. Melissa, you are my go-to person. I adore you. I also just love, like she said, we're both photographers / lawyers. It's very strange.
Yeah.
So when she slid into my inbox, how did you contact me again?
I think I was like, hi, I have this weird intersection of photography and legal, and I don't really know what to do with myself, but I really love your business. Do you need someone to work for you?
And you guys, sometimes those cold emails that come in, you never know what they're going to turn into. And now it's turned into not only her working for TLP, but us becoming really good friends and having a huge impact on the creative and wedding industry through TLP. So anyway, Melissa, thanks for sending that email, girl. About a year ago, actually.
Yeah, I cannot tell you how excited I am that I sent that because it's just so many awesome things. So yeah.
Beautiful things come from random situations. And Taiyler is sort of like that as well, except I found you through someone else. I can't even remember, but you should introduce yourself now.
Yeah. So my name is Taiyler. In my last year of law school at the University of Montana, and I'm the legal intern here at the Legal Paige. I'm a unicorn in this group because I'm not interested in photography at all. And I also think I was found randomly. You messaged someone on LinkedIn, one of my friends who was like with an internship opportunity. He's like, that's not really my jam, but you know who's perfect for it, Taiyler. And here we are, like almost a year later too.
That's so insane. Yeah, you guys. So this is actually kind of entertaining because we said this on our group meeting the other week. I was like, oh, I don't live close to anyone. Everyone is remote and works in different states. And Taylor's on the call like, Paige, we live like 2 blocks away from each other. And I kind of forget because Taiyler and I just like both work from home, right? We don't have like an office that we all congregate at.
Right.
But Taiyler and I I went to the same law school that Taiyler goes to. So we call it the University of Montana School of Law because that is what it was named when I was there. And it has a different name now, but that's just the easiest because everyone knows that we have one law school in Montana, you guys, if you can believe it. And so Taiyler, you're not from Montana though, right?
No, I'm actually from Washington State, like Eastern Washington.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So it's pretty close for all of you tuning in. Montana and like Eastern Washington are decently close. What, like 3-4 hours kind of, sort of?
Yeah. To get home, it's like 5 hours-ish.
Okay. Not too bad. You guys are all probably tuning in being like, that is a long ways. It's not. Trust me. Like 3 hours is 30 minutes here in Montana. Anyway. Yeah. So we both I went to the same law school. She is graduating. So this is her last year. And you have been a force on the Legal Paige and have been so helpful for Melissa and I. And like I said, I just had no idea how I could even find an intern for the Legal Paige that would want to do what we do. But Taiyler has taken the bull by the horns and has just really made it her own. She kind of crafted what her duties were in this internship. Melissa and I, we never had an intern before. So it's been a joy to have you on the team for the past year and obviously the rest of this year and hopefully in the future as well.
Yes.
So, so you guys, that is a bit about Melissa and Taiyler and I. The Legal Paige is obviously broken up into like the legal side of things and all of the legal content we produce. And then anyone who wants to work with us one-on-one goes to our virtual law firm, Griffith Law. And so Taiyler, Melissa, and I are constantly talking basically all day long, all week long about legal things. And whether that's clients or whether that's just TLP related legal issues and contracts, if we're drafting template contracts or template documents, we are all working on that. And then obviously all the content, marketing, digital stuff is with our other team members on the TLP side of things. So that being said, you guys, as Melissa, you and I have a very, very fond affection for RBG. Oh. She's been such this huge force. I think when you first go to law school, you start hearing about her. You probably heard about her, obviously, because she's kind of this pop culture icon now. We're going to get into that in this episode. But we all knew about her before we went to law school. But when we went to law school is when she really started making an impact. Melissa, for you, what do you recall in law school that was like, oh my gosh, I really, really want to meet RBG, be like her? And just like, how did that impact you when you first started reading all these things in law school that she did?
Yeah. So I think before she blew up, I remember I was a 1L, which is the first year of law school. And I was sitting in the library, and in the library, we had these pictures that were like all the old class pictures from, like 1950 something, 1960 something. And of course, it's just like all white dudes, just like mostly all white dudes. And then I was sitting there one day and I was studying and I was like, kind of a miserable first year law student because you're just drowning in work. But I looked up and at the very bottom, so it's just like all these white dudes. And then at the bottom, it has the staff and there's Ruth Bader Ginsburg, just like a little picture of this like little woman with her glasses. And that was just so cool to me to see, it start to change with the years. And she was this force. And I think she was the second faculty member who was a female at Rutgers Law. And that piqued my interest. And then I started reading her opinions and her dissenting opinions. And it was just, she had an incredible mind. And to see that represented on the Supreme Court that was fantastic. So that was my first kind of love for her. And then it just has grown over the course of everybody else finding out how great she is and it blowing up and she becoming a pop culture icon with t-shirts and these movies. And I think
then everyone started to love her, but we loved her first. No, I think there were many, many people that loved her before we all loved her.
Oh my gosh. Oh, absolutely.
Taylor, what about you?
Yeah. So the whole RBG thing kind of like became a pop culture movement. Like when I think it was probably my freshman year of undergrad in Seattle. And so that's like the time in your life where you're already like unlearning a lot of things in a lot of ways. And so for me, it was so fascinating to see at a high level of like such what you feel is like such professionalism, this huge daunting court, and to see this little woman like running roost. And not apologizing for being smart and not apologizing for being steadfast. Like that was huge for me as a young woman at that point in my life. It was just so fascinating and so empowering to see.
Yeah, it seriously was. And I mean, thinking back to where we were at when she kind of started becoming the notorious RBG, Melissa and I were in law school, basically. Yeah. I remember it happening. I think I was maybe a 2L. And then, Taylor, you were like, what a pivotal time in your life is like starting out undergrad. Mm-hmm. Gosh, so when was that? What year was that?
So I started undergrad fall of 2012. And if we can go on a little side tangent for a second, I never wanted to be a lawyer. Was never interested in law. And my stepmom is a judge and was always like, maybe you should just think about it. Like, I think you'd really be good at it. And I was like, no, that's silly. Like, I just want to help people. I don't see how that's going to do that. Mm-hmm. And seeing RBG and seeing how she was using her platform, which doesn't initially seem that big, but hers expanded into every corner of pop culture. Like it was so, it was so incredible. And so I started thinking about it because I was not satisfied in my business career, started thinking about it. My stepmom planted the idea and then started studying for the LSAT. And I was like, this is it. And I honestly don't know if I would have gone to law school if there hadn't been people like RBG out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just to hear that. And there's so many, I mean, hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of probably women who were interested in the legal world that think this way as well. For me, I truly feel like I fell in love with her during law school. I didn't have a huge background in RBG world before that because I was a econ major and political science major. So I knew about her, but I was so entrenched in kind of econometrics and math and undergrad. It's a long story, but I thought I was going to go get my PhD in economics, but instead I was like, no, I think I want to go to law school. And I thought I'd be a trial attorney, and whoa, how the world has changed since then. But I was kind of the same way as you. I was like, I think this is something that it wasn't on my radar all of undergrad. And then I kind of knew my last year of undergrad, this is the next step. I'm just going to try it out and see if I really want to do it. And then I just fell in love with the law in my first year of law school. But RBG in particular, for me, wasn't someone who was this, massive icon to me, and also someone that I really got to know in depth until my 2L year. And that's because, so you guys, there's 3 years of law school. We're probably talking like lawyers here. Everyone's like, what are you guys saying?
What is an L? Or they think we're bad at law school because we're there for 3 years. Why do you need another
too.
year?
Why do you need one more? So it's 3 years and people call them like L1, L2, L3 in like normalcy. I'm sure you guys have had friends that say that. And I'm like, no, it's 1L year, 2L year, and 3L year. So there's 3 years of law school. You have to get through 3 to graduate. And every law school is different. Melissa, I don't know when you took con law, but at the University of Montana School of Law, we take con law our second year. I know some law schools take it there first.
Yeah, we took it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, that's very common. We're like the weird people here in Montana. They've changed so much with the academics at the law school over the years. I know it's been a huge thing, Taylor. I don't know if it still is now, but it was when I was there. They just keep changing the curriculum and they can't figure out like the best way to do it. But because it's like I didn't take con law my first year, I was so entrenched in all these other classes, like RBG wasn't on my radar. But then 2L year, it's like this world opened up over what she did and how prestigious she was to con law. And I know that my professor in particular, Professor Johnstone, hey, I know he's not listening, but I adore
not
him.
Listening to us.
I'm like, hey, Johnstone. He now lives sort of by me. Anyway, I digress. He was like, we all loved Johnstone. He's like the most brilliant person ever. You know how you like love that one like law professor so much? And it was a general feeling and consensus amongst everyone in your class. That's how we felt about Professor Johnstone. But he loved RBG so much too. And I just remember all of his cases. He got like super enthused about like the background of them. And I think he had her picture on his slides often at the front of the room. I don't totally recall. But anyway, that is when I started being very fond of her. So with that being said, we could obviously keep talking about law school, but we should stop talking about law school. Now, thinking about RBG's passing, and everyone was so sad. It was just like this moment of mourning that I have never felt in terms of the legal world, and especially females in the legal world. It was, last Friday, about a week ago. And yeah, I texted Melissa. Melissa, I don't know if you found out before I texted you, but it was like all of me and all of my girlfriends from law school were texting each other being like, what just happened? Like it felt like the world was ending.
Yeah.
Well, how did you guys find out and how did you feel?
I got a text from you and I got a text from my mom and my sister. And then of course I like opened social media and just everything was, mourning. Yeah, it was a shock because I know she was trying to hold on so hard for the election. So hard.
So when I am not working with you two or going to school full time, I work at a spin studio.
Doing all the things.
Yeah, I work at a spin studio. And I love my job there. But I found out while the class was in session and I was out at the front desk. And so I remember getting the notification and just sitting there and being like, what do I do? And so at the end of every spin class, it's my job to go in and hand out cold towels so that you can recover from that absolute nightmare. And I just remember being so despondent and being like, take it, just take that towel. And like being like truly, I went home and just sat on the floor and was just like, what do I do? Mm-hmm. Like, it's so weird not knowing someone, but still feeling so deeply personally impacted.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's exactly how I felt too. I was like, why am I so sad? Why do I have so much sorrow weighing on me right now? I have also followed politics, obviously, pretty heavily throughout my entire life. I thought I would go into politics. I thought I would just do something with politics. That was kind of the trajectory I thought I was going to go on. So you guys are learning a lot about me in this episode. But with that comes, RBG's appointment. And I think that's what weighed on me so heavily too was this is an election year. Also, this is 2020. Like, could more bad things go wrong in 2020?
I know we have to stop saying that because then it keeps happening.
Yep.
Truth. I was like, really? really? Like RBG now? Seriously? I don't know. I guess I just thought that she would last forever, which we all thought she would. I mean, she does 80 million push-ups a day, but it was super sad. I was at home and it was Friday night. I was still working, of course. You guys, I'm a workaholic. So I was working it was like 5:30ish maybe here. And I heard Marco say, "No, Paigey," from downstairs. And I was like, oh my gosh, like someone died. What happened? And he comes running up and he was like, check the news. And I looked at the news and then I was like, no. And he knew that I would be so sad. And oh my gosh. And so there was just like a couple glasses of red wine that night and texting a lot of my girlfriends that I knew would be impacted as well. And we were just going, back and forth, messaging, saying, how this is just going to change so drastically, everything that all the doors she opened during her lifetime. So that being said, I want to give a little bit of background here for everyone tuning in about RBG and who she was. And ladies, feel free to chime in if you have anything in addition as I'm kind of going over this brief history of her, because it's good to have a background of where she came from, what she did, law school she went to, and kind of how she became, obviously, a Supreme Court justice. You have to have a decent background in con law. So Ruth Bader Ginsburg is a Supreme Court justice, was a Supreme Court justice, and actually the second woman to be appointed to the position after Sandra Day O'Connor, whom I have met, actually, if you can believe it.
Oh.
I know. I've never met RBG. It's like a lifelong goal here. But now I will meet her someday. Someday I will meet her again. And so she was the second. Sandra Day O'Connor was the first, but RBG was someone who I think lots of people didn't think would become a justice on the Supreme Court as soon as she did, I guess is the best way to say it. But she had the background and obviously academia to do it and time on the bench to do it as well. But she, you guys, is from Brooklyn, New York. I believe her father, was a first generation American. One of her parents was a first generation American. But she grew up very low income, working class in Brooklyn. And so that's kind of the start of her lifetime. She ended up going to Harvard, which is, everyone knows. We don't
casual,
really have to, casual. We don't have to talk about Harvard. And she obviously excelled academically. Something really interesting that I found when I was researching her, and I think I knew this from one of her documentaries, but she was the first female member of the Harvard Law Review. And we're going to tangent again to law reviews, and law reviews are one of the hardest things to do during law school. And it's kind of one of these, I would like to say resume builders, but also you have to apply for them. You have to write all these things. I was on the law review in law school, and it was one of the hardest things I've ever done because I was not a huge writer when I first started law school, and then I slowly became a writer during law school. Were you guys on the law review?
I was on a law review. I wasn't on the main one. I was on the business law review. But yeah.
Oh yeah, there's different law reviews too.
Yeah, it sucked up a lot of time.
So much time.
RBG was also on Columbia's law review. I think she was on both.
Yeah.
When she
I'm sure she was because she switched. Yeah. But you guys, she was the first female of the Harvard Law Review. What?
Crazy.
What?
Yep.
We had, I think, 80% females on our law review, maybe 50-50 during my year. But I remember the years after where there was so many females that were just top of the class.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And Taylor, you weren't on a law review, were you?
No, I'm kind of the opposite of you, Paige. I was always a writer. And then when I got to law school, it kind of messed with my brain a little bit because it's a whole different ballgame writing for legal purposes.
Oh yeah, you have to completely relearn things.
Yeah. And so I kind of did a little value analysis, and I was like, I could go through this grueling application process to then do a grueling task, or I could diversify a little bit and hence worked at the spin studio and now work with you. So you should be glad I'm not on law review.
You have time to help us.
Yeah, no pressure, but
thank you. Thank you, Taylor. So sweet and kind of you. Yeah, I mean, like, law reviews, no joke. I spent 10, 20, 30 hours a week on law review. On top of all of the things in law school. It was hard. But I can't even imagine how hard Harvard Law Review would be.
Yeah.
And being the first female. So RBG, power to you. And then in the middle of law school, you guys, she moved to Columbia Law School, and that was because of her husband who got a job there. And then, as Melissa said, she was also on the Columbia Law School Law Review. And then, of course, after law school, her legal career started taking shape. And ACLU was kind of the first big place that RBG started making a splash, and she created the Women's Rights Project. This was like half a century ago, if you guys can believe it. In like 1970, she became the executive director of the ACLU. Like, what?
Wasn't she
half a century ago?
She had a family too this whole time too, right? Didn't she have kids like while she was?
Oh yeah, she was like, she was having kids in law school, I believe.
Okay.
One at least, and one after, I think.
Well, and in law school, like, she wasn't just going to law school. Her husband got super sick in law school. So she basically went to law school twice because she went to class for him and then gets out and can't find a job. And it's like, are you kidding?
Oh, that's right. Yeah. She was like going to law school for him because he couldn't go to his classes.
Yeah.
He could study at home, and he was going through like rigorous cancer treatment. And so she was doing like double duty work. Oh, and having a kid and being on the law review. Yep. I was like, okay, she's priming herself for the Supreme Court. No, JK, but maybe she was. Yeah. RBG. I can't imagine. I couldn't even keep my head above water in law school. Like, I couldn't even really date Marco. It was so hard to do anything other than law school. And like Taylor said, a couple things personally for yourself. I did like a dance class workout, and, she does spin, and I did hikes or whatever, but I couldn't do anything. I didn't even have a dog in law school.
Trust me. My whole family knows, like, graduation day, I am getting a dog.
Because we actually have time to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, because I don't have time for anything. But like, I don't have kids. I'm not responsible for anyone else. And I'm still like, what is going on? And this is someone who had multiple kids, went to law school essentially twice, and prestigious law schools. Right. And then gets out and no one wants to hire her. Baffling.
Yeah. I mean, it was a long time ago. But you guys, during this time, I mean, female attorneys like weren't really a thing.
True.
So big firms, especially in New York, were not hiring females. Her husband was a tax lawyer, which I recall, and he got like all kinds of job offers. And yeah, Marty was kind of one of the males in the tax world that, like had skin in the game, like knew what he was doing. But then, of course, he had his wife, who was also just a force to be reckoned with in the legal world at that time. And she just like never backed down. She was like, oh, whatever. Like, nobody's hiring. I guess I'll just like do my own thing. And then also change the way the world turns in my, as I'm driving along. So she was director of the ACLU and then established the Women's Rights Project. And that's kind of how she got going in her career for gender discrimination and all of course, everything else that she had a huge play in as well. So anything else, you guys, in terms of like her law school career or like right post law school that we missed?
Yeah. So I guess she clerked after law school for a district judge. And then she had to teach because no law firms would hire her. So she ended up at a public university in New Jersey, which was Rutgers Law School, which was also my law school. So, I was super happy to find that out. I actually didn't know that until I went there. But then after Rutgers, she taught at Columbia, where she was one of the school's first female tenured professors. And I think concurrently, she was also doing stuff for the ACLU. So she was like working for different projects and stuff. Yeah, I think that's pretty much what I remember from her history for teaching.
Yeah. So ACLU kind of came later after she clerked and then after she taught at Rutgers, correct?
Yeah. I think that's right.
Okay. Yeah. So she was, obviously she couldn't get a job. So then she went into teaching, which clearly catapulted her to what she was doing with the ACLU and working with the ACLU, which helped her start arguing things and taking on like gender discrimination cases is where she first started. And that was about 1970. I remember in 71, she argued, in 71, she had kind of her first case that went to the Supreme Court. I think she was part of a petition with the ACLU.
Mm-hmm.
That was like a case dealing with a mom wanted to be designated an administrator of an estate. So this was like trust and estate law. And I think her and her husband has separated. And then the mom had a son that passed away, and the dad was automatically like preferred to females to be the executor of the estate or administrator of the estate. And the mom like filed a lawsuit against it and was like, that's not fair.
Mm-hmm.
Who, is the most qualified person. So that was kind of the gist of Reed versus Reed, which was a 1971 case. And that is where kind of Ginsburg started, all briefing you guys is obviously part of the litigation process. And so when people are super excited about arguing in front of the Supreme Court, there's so much back end work that goes to that is prior to that actually happening. And there's so many stages of briefing. And so when she was writing huge petitions and briefing to the Supreme Court, that's kind of where she got started with con law. And then I remember in 1972 was the biggest case that is part of On the Basis of Sex. That movie is based upon this case, Moritz versus Commissioner. So it was a Internal Revenue case, IRS case. And Marty, her husband, if you recall, if you guys have watched the movie, he was the one that kind of told her about this case. And then it ended up kind of hinging on sex discrimination, but it was opposite. So this was one of RBG's best ways to start arguing gender discrimination was from a male's perspective back in the day, obviously 1970s. So she said that there was discrimination on the basis of sex, which was a violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution, because this guy had claimed a tax deduction for the cost of a caregiver because he was, giving care to his mother. And the IRS denied that deduction. And so this is where the lawsuit came into play. If you've seen the movie, she was arguing that only women could get this tax deduction for caregiving, but he couldn't. So it was like a flip-flop way of arguing it, which I thought was brilliant. And obviously everyone did. And the movie is great as well. But that was probably one of her most pivotal moments I wish I could get inside RBG's head, but to be like, how can we get to the point where we are arguing for women's rights? She was like, let's go about this a different way. So smart. And then Melissa, why don't you talk about the first case that she argued in front of the Supreme Court?
So that was 1973. And it was a woman in the Air Force who applied for benefits for her dependent husband. And she was told she'd have to prove that he was a dependent, even though men in the Air Force didn't have to prove that their wives were dependent. So a little bit of, sex discrimination there. And so it was Frontero versus Richardson. I think that's right. Fronterio. Mm-hmm. Yep. I'm going to butcher.
Yeah. So it was like middle 1970s is when she really started the ACL, her ACLU cases and everything she was arguing started going from the circuit level to the Supreme Court. I do want to note here that Moritz versus Commissioner was a 10th Circuit case and cert was denied. We're throwing so many legal things at you guys right now. Mm-hmm. But cert was denied, which means they petitioned to the United States Supreme Court and it was denied. So they weren't going to review review the 10th Circuit's decision. So this was 2 different appeals, because in the federal world, you have to start with the district court level, and then the district court decides something, you appeal to the circuit. And that is where that big case that happened on the basis of sex movie, that was the one that we were just talking about. And then you can appeal to the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court only takes like 80 cases a year.
Yeah, they limit the number.
Over like 10,000 petitions or more, I'm guessing.
Yeah, a crazy amount.
Crazy amount. So you guys, like, very, very small chance that you will get your cert, like actually reviewed by the Supreme Court. So they denied cert in that case. And so this was the first case that she did go to the Supreme Court and was able to argue. Before we kind of move on here into some of her most pivotal cases, when she went to the Supreme Court, I'm going to talk about her nomination process here. Really, you guys, the court was forever changed when RBG stood up in front of them and started arguing that laws which hinged on sex discrimination or hinged on gender and sex should pass intermediate scrutiny, which there was a different level of scrutiny that it had been in the past, which is a standard of review that explained whether the law was related to a legitimate government objective. So you had to pass, like, the X law would not be constitutional if it wasn't related to a legitimate government objective or government interest. And so she changed that and said that sex laws, gender laws, anything along those lines, any law that really had to do with discrimination on sex or differentiation on sex had to have that legitimate government objective. And that's where she was able to start arguing, well, it doesn't. And then that's how you get the Supreme Court to change their mind. And not so, I tried to boil that down for everyone tuning in. You guys are all probably like, what the hell is constitutional law? It's very confusing, but important for what RBG did.
Doesn't it? It makes it more difficult for a law to pass muster, basically. Like, if it's a higher level of scrutiny, then the law has to, there are more things that this law has to do in order for it to actually be deemed constitutional.
Yeah, I think rational basis is first. Is that correct?
Yeah, rational basis, intermediate, strict scrutiny.
Yeah. So rational basis was where it was. That's a great way to put it, Melissa. It's kind of this tiered approach. Rational basis is the scrutiny that judges are interpreting laws under, low basis of scrutiny. And so it was easy to say the law was constitutional. And then she moved it up a level, I guess, is the best way to explain it for people who are late, people who are tuning in. Okay.
So like, oh yeah, immediate scrutiny. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Intermediate. Yeah. Perfect. I think I said that in con law class back in the day. I was like, oh yeah, low level, intermediate, really, really tough. The things we do to make con law make sense.
Rational basis review. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Let's talk about, so this was in the 70s. That she was doing all kinds of work. And then in 1980, President Carter appointed RBG to the Court of Appeals. And she was there for 13 years. Well, I think he appointed her. And then, of course, she had to get passed through the Senate. And then I don't remember what year, but anyway, I know it was like over a decade that she was on the Circuit Court of Appeals. So that is a big deal because then she had over a decade's worth of experience on the bench. She did a lot of different things at the circuit level. And usually, for everyone tuning in, I'm not going to say always because there's definitely some exceptions here, but usually district court judges are oftentimes appointed and then they move up to circuit court judges, or a president will just appoint you to a circuit court position. And you guys, these are all presidential appointments. Remember, judges are supposed to be merely arbiters of the law and completely impartial. Yeah.
Completely impartial.
I think you get my point there. They're appointed by presidents, and presidents are elected by the people and by parties and all these things. So yeah, there's definitely politics at play. But so she kind of missed the district court level, which is totally fine. And it happens a lot. But what I'm trying to say is usually circuit court judges become Supreme Court justices. Usually you have to have some experience on the bench in one way, shape, or form. I know there's exceptions to this, but in modern day times, I would say for at least the past, 30 to 50 years, that's usually what happens, because you don't want to get to become a Supreme Court justice and have no idea how to be a judge, right? So then in 1993, as we all know, President Clinton appointed her to the United States Supreme Court, and she passed through the Senate, and she was able to get on the Supreme Court, which is just amazing. So she was on it for 27 years.
Yeah, I mean, just to put that in perspective, I was born in 93.
Oh, it's a good way to put it. I was born in 91, and I think Melissa was too.
Yep.
So yeah, basically our whole life, RBG has been on the bench of the Supreme Court, which is crazy town. And then she also did all these things prior to that as well. So once she got on the bench, let's talk about some of her most pivotal cases here, because I think they're really important for us to hit on, and kind of the lasting legacy that she had upon all of us as Americans. And my whole goal here with this episode is not to be like RBG was the most amazing person, even though she was, and I truly believe that. And some of you may differ your opinions. I totally respect that. But I think what she did on the Supreme Court forever changed how Americans, and particularly females and gender discrimination laws, changed. Like they completely changed, and how our lives have changed as Americans because of not just her. Obviously, there's 9 people on the Supreme Court, and there has to be a majority ruling, but she was pivotal in a lot of these majority rulings. So the first one that I wanted to bring up was the landmark United States versus Virginia case in 1996. It was like very quickly after she got on the Supreme Court. And this was the Virginia Military Institute case that we all learn about in law school. Like, you guys remember this, right? It was, I was like, oh yeah, this is like this starts out basically the gender discrimination chapter in our con law class.
Yep.
So it was a 7-1 ruling. And they said that the Institute violated the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause because women who were seeking and were fit for the Military Institute could not be offered anything less under the state's obligation to afford them genuinely equal protection. So obviously females were not allowed at this male-only institute, and they had a male-only admission policy, and that was challenged. So very, very, very important case. And then, there's so many other cases. United States versus O'Hagan in 1997, 1999, Olmstead versus LC, kind of an ADA case there as well. So she really started getting into just marginalized, disabilities cases, obviously gender discrimination cases. And then in 2000 was Bush versus Gore. We all probably remember that case. Like, holy moly, we all better remember that case. And that was the presidential election between George W. Bush and Al Gore. And it went up to the Supreme Court very quickly because they needed to determine, whether those hanging chads, all of those issues down in Florida. But regardless of what happened, we all know who became president and how, the Supreme Court swayed in their decision on that. This is where, if you guys have ever heard the terms, I dissent, or people just like say that now in like everyday nomenclature, I dissent was from RBG because she wrote a scathing sort of dissent in this case. And previously, everyone had always written dissents where they say, respectfully, I disagree, blah, blah, blah. Like, I'm going to dissent and here are all the reasons why. But she deliberately concluded her decision with the words, I dissent. And that became part of, I think 2000 was the pivotal time that RBG really started becoming a pop culture icon. Do you guys agree?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think it was kind of like, I dissent, no respect, we're not here to play around. And people were like, okay, then here we go. Like,
my opinion.
Let's see what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unapologetic.
Yeah. Very, very unapologetic. Then in 2015 was and you guys, there's so many cases in between here. We're just like touching the surface. We can't go into all of them here. These are just big cases that RBG had her hands in, of course. Was 2015, all kinds of things started coming down from the Supreme Court. And this is, I would say, basically what she worked her whole life for, was things that happened in 2015 that the majority of the Supreme Court came down hard on. So Taiyler, do you want to talk about those?
Yes. So in 2015, big stuff happened. First case that like really comes to mind for me was the King versus Burwell, which addressed the Affordable Care Act. And that decision allowed that a federal government can provide subsidies to American citizens who purchase like healthcare. Huge deal. It opened up doors for so many people to get health insurance that couldn't before, myself included, who's currently insured under the Affordable Health Care Act. Mm-hmm. And then the other big one that stood out is Obergefell, which, if that's the right way to pronounce it, good. If not, I don't know how else to pronounce it. But in that one, the Supreme Court, huge decision, 5-4 majority ruling that same-sex marriage legal in all 50 states. Huge deal.
Yeah, we all remember Obergefell when it came down. I mean, rainbows everywhere, and huge change for the United States as a whole for same-sex marriage. I was elated. I was so happy with this decision. And so were obviously so many of my friends as well. I know some of you may not obviously agree with this. If not, that's fine. You probably shouldn't be listening to our podcast.
Yeah, how did you get here?
How did you get here? But seriously, those two came back to back. So they were on the same year of decisions, and the court hears things in kind of bundles. So they issue decisions in certain periods of time that the court is sitting. And so these two were handed down, I think, back to back in a week. So that was huge. The Affordable Care Act was upheld, and then Obergefell came down. So 2015, I feel like was this big culmination of RBG's, fight that she had for her whole life for equal opportunity for everyone, for same-sex marriage, obviously, and gender discrimination was a huge thing throughout her life. And then, of course, access to healthcare as well. Okay, so now that we've gone through, she's had other ones, of course, since 2015 as well. I don't know if you guys wanted to touch on any more. Feel free to chime in if you do. But what is like one big thing that you've learned that RBG was, a major factor with?
I think one of the big things that I've learned just from my time with knowing of RBG and who she is as a person, I think the biggest thing I've learned is that no hero or no mentor that you have is perfect. They're all human. Mm-hmm. They all have flaws. They contradict themselves sometimes, but they can still be your hero, and you can still look up to that person and value what they did. Like, if we're being 100% honest, RBG was totally not perfect. Mm-hmm. She was a champion for so many things. But if we're calling out the good things, I think it's important to mention some of the bad things. Like, she was on the court for my entire life and had one black law clerk.
Oh my gosh. I know that's been going around right now in the media. I mean, it's a big deal.
Yeah, like that statistic does not just happen. That's not an accident. Like,
no, it's
not.
And
I think it's important to call that. And like, I know that Melissa has talked about it before, but like her pop culture embracing of being called notorious RBG, that's interesting on its own.
Yeah, Melissa, talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, RBG was taken from, or the notorious RBG was taken from, it was appropriation. It was taken from, Biggie Smalls, like that. Mm-hmm. That was purposeful when somebody took that and put that on her. And I mean, people recognized that imagery. And I think that blew up even more. But yeah, it was cultural appropriation. That was not something that was right at all. And I don't think it wasn't her, but still, I don't think she ever talked about the fact, too, that was happening. So,
yeah. And she kind of took that on. I mean, in her later years on the bench,
did she?
She just kind of like laughed it off when she would do, speeches at different places. And she, had that documentary where she talks about it a lot. And I mean, it's really interesting because if we're talking about neutral arbiters of the law, RBG was one of those people that we all knew were super liberal. Like she was liberal when she went on the bench. I think she became more liberal with her time on the bench. And then, we're talking about a lot of her flaws here. Taiyler, thank you so much for bringing up, she had one black law clerk. Like that is not okay.
That's crazy.
It is crazy. And I think it's important because we're talking about all these pivotal things that she did with case law, because you guys, case law changes the trajectory of what the United States is going to do with new laws, and how can new laws be written if they're, gender-based, that kind of thing. Healthcare, access to healthcare based, same-sex marriage based, those types of things. But she was also a human who did things that a lot of us don't agree with. I mean, all three of us here are like, that is not okay. Mm-hmm. I know that there's other judges, particularly conservative judges, who have had like 25% people of color as law clerks. So, I mean, if we're going to be weighing things there, like that does not weigh heavily in RBG's favor. And I wish she would have done that differently, because like Taiyler said, like that's not by accident. Like she had to have known. And so why, right? That's a question I would love to have asked her. Like, why would you do that? If you were to champion for so many other marginalized, people in the United States, like why not people of color, Blacks in particular? Like how, there's that harrowing picture that like went across the media last week during her funeral. And it was like all of her law clerks on the steps of the Supreme Court. And it's all white people, like 100% white clerks. And it just hit me. I was like, this is a cool photo, but there's definitely that is missing. And how could no one see that? And then everyone did. And it kind of blew up on social media. If you guys have seen that at all come across your feed. Yeah, very interesting. And then, notorious RBG was a big thing. It was this pop culture icon. I think, cultural appropriation, not good. There's benefits, there's bad things and benefits to everything. I think it also.
Well, I think it's hard because like, on one hand, that image, not the best move you could have made, not the best option. But also, I think her being like that projected her to cultural icon in the way that made law tangible for people. Mm-hmm. And so it's hard because it's so damaging and so detrimental in many ways, but also made people know who she was and know about the law and maybe think about Googling a couple things. Which I don't really think is a bad thing, but it's hard.
Yeah, that's like exactly what I'm trying to say here. You put it, thank you for putting that into words for me. I feel like little girls like had no idea that who she was or what she did. And even like, girls and just any young people didn't totally understand like what is the value of the United States Supreme Court and what do they actually do? Like we learn about it for 2 seconds in like high school government class. And usually you're not even listening or tuning in. So she really brought to the table like why the law is cool and from my perspective, like why it should be cool and why you should care about it. That is most important.
She was iconic beyond, the appropriation that she did. It was the lace collar, I think, was another, that was a symbol of her that went beyond who she was. It was a symbol of, dissenting and having an unapologetic opinion about something, especially something like politics or the law. And I loved that. I think that was great.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, there's good and bad with everything. I think it's appropriate for us all here to talk about the good and the bad, because I don't want people tuning in to be like, oh my gosh, these three just love her. Like we do, but we also know she's human and had flaws and also made some like not so great decisions while she was managing, obviously, all of her clerks. Like that is not okay. It's just so wrong in so many ways. But, we can't control what RBG did. I think I can love her for what she has done and how many glass ceilings that she's broken, not only for women, but also for, other marginalized populations as well. But I think the life lesson here is no icon or no historic figure that we all love is perfect. And we all need to point out the flaws as well. And one of the things that I just want to touch on here from my perspective is she had a huge impact on white feminism. and not other types of feminism. And I know that. I'm aware of that. I am a white person talking about this. So that's, I'm not blind to the fact that that is probably why I feel like she did a lot for white females. And I understand that now there is, I do think though that she has opened the door for other people as well to be champions of other marginalized populations and people of color and Black women. Like there is room for that. Like there absolutely needs to be someone who does that on the Supreme Court. I don't think it's going to be the next person appointed if Trump gets to have his nomination go through the Senate. So I'm hopeful that as people come and go on the Supreme Court in the next decade or two, that there is another person on the court that champions these efforts post RBG not being on the court. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I think my perspective on that is just in general, I think RBG opened so many doors for so many people, in particular people that look like you, me, and Melissa. Mm-hmm. And I think that in doing so, I think she left a lot of doors closed. And I think you can only expect so much out of one person. Does that excuse what she did? Absolutely not in some aspects. But I think that kind of in the way she approached her Supreme Court cases, you have to lay brick by brick. And I think that in this case, there's totally room for other people. And I think that she opened the door to a lot of women to feel okay sharing their opinions and not feel bad about it. And to not feel bad about being the smartest person in the room and to actually shoot for this, like for the total ceiling, because you can do it and you can get there. Yeah. And I think it's so important to keep mind moving forward that the things you do when you vote, the people that you choose, those people have control over who gets to that court. And not even just the Supreme Court, federal level courts, other things that make really important decisions. And I think that is just something to keep in mind. And I think it totally drives home like how impactful these things that seem so ethereal and so up in the sky impact your community like at home.
Yeah, I think that was super, super well said, Taylor.
Yeah, it just goes back to politics, which is like crazy. It all comes back to it. Right now, 2020 has just been quite the year in terms of everything that's gone on, but also it's an election year. And now we are facing the next, basically, what are we at? Like a month and a week? Maybe if you can believe it. Like when this episode airs, it's probably a month left of the election, and it's going to have such an impact on what happens in the next 4 years. And I think these 4 years are so critical for the United States. And so obviously you guys know I'm a huge proponent of voting. Vote, vote, vote. I don't care how you vote. I can't control that, but I do want to say get out and vote, because if you don't, then that's basically giving a vote to somebody else without you being present and being able to have, and especially if you're in a swing state, please get out and vote. And right now they are doing all kinds of things for mail-in ballots, and there is really no excuse to not vote this year. So if you are able to vote, if you are of age, and of course you can, please do so. I don't think people totally realize until RBG passed, like why this is so important. I mean, they did when Obama's nomination didn't go through as well. So I think it's very important for people who are now kind of at like new adults, right? 18 can vote, and young adults as well have really had a really interesting 4 years of how elections impact the Supreme Court. And then the Supreme Court decides, literally is the ultimate decider of laws. And since that happened with the Obama administration, and it wouldn't go through the Senate, everyone was like, oh my gosh, this is super political, because then Trump was able to take that nomination and put someone on the Supreme Court. And you guys, these are life tenure positions. This is really what I wanted to do with this episode too, was really just to explain to you how important it is. And so that's why I say, I don't care which way you vote. I just want you to vote knowing that the person you're voting for, really, there's so much more that you're voting for than the single human that is the number one person on the ballot. And I think all of us, especially during elections, are so impacted by like Biden versus Trump, Trump versus Biden, like all these bad things and all these campaigns that are coming out. But at the end of the day, just know like party lines are also important here and what's going to happen when X gets elected kind of thing. Like, remember your vote is also incredibly impactful in that respect as well. So anything else with that, ladies?
Yeah. Can I add to do your research on a local level? You know,
your thank you.
General, your local judges, any elected official in your local area, do some research and figure out who you're voting for and that those votes matter too directly to your communities.
Yeah, where you're actually living and where things are actually making an impact on your everyday life. Yeah. I mean, the Supreme Court makes obviously an impact on the national level, but Melissa's so right. I think we all are so entrenched in like what bubble we're going to fill in at that first column of our ballot. But everything else is like, I feel like sometimes people have no idea and they're just like, oh, that name sounds cool. I'm going to fill in that bubble. And that is what you don't want to do when you're voting this year.
Yeah, I also would like to encourage when you're voting to think outside your own perspective of how will this impact just me. I would like to encourage everyone who's listening to think a little bit about what does this mean for communities outside my own? What does this mean for minority communities, for economically challenged communities? Think about those people when you vote too, because those people are already being hit the hardest. And a lot of things that end up on ballots sometimes have secondary effects that we don't think of. And I encourage you when you're voting, like Melissa said, do a quick Google. Figure out what's going on. Think about how this impacts not just you, but your entire community as a whole, which does include those minority and economically challenged communities.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Black Lives Matters movement went through the entire world this year, and especially the United States. And we don't just want that to like falter by this election. And that also happens on the state and local level. I think people forget that. Don't just be voting based upon the Supreme Court, like what we're talking about here today. There's, regardless of the issues that RBG had with people of color and her not, having enough law clerks in that respect, think about parties here and the people on your ballot in your area that will have a greater impact on pursuing the values of the Black Lives Matters movement. I think that's important as well. If you believe in that, then you should definitely do your homework and vote as such.
Well, also, there are for local level there's resources. If you Google, people have compiled resources for, what these people stand for. So that's definitely like Googleable. You can figure out exactly in one place, like where people stand on different issues and check your registration. I think that's one of the last things I wanted to say too, is there has been shady stuff in the past with people getting purged off of voter, poll lists, and check your registration. Make sure you know where you're going to vote. And if you're going to vote via the mail, make sure that you are all set up to do that as well. Those were two important things I wanted to make sure to reiterate.
No, I'm glad that you guys are all chiming in. I mean, it's important. It's an election year. We didn't come into this episode thinking about talking a whole bunch about elections. We could do that in another episode, but it has obviously a huge impact on politics right now with RBG's death. And now there is a spot open on the Supreme Court. So I think it'd be really interesting as we end our time here. What is your guys' favorite RBG quote? I'll start with mine. So mine is, a woman's work, whether at home or on the job, is as important as a man's. That is something that she said at the very, 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 very beginning of her career. And I think that trickled through everything that she did. And it is something that I truly believe in as well, is like stereotypical gender roles is not something that happens in my personal life. And I truly believe that a woman's work should be held up to the standard of every single male in the United States too. I know that is obviously a feminist perspective, but I love that quote. What about you guys?
My favorite is definitely fight for the things that you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you. I think that just kind of epitomizes RBG to me, of like not being afraid to take a hard stance and to have an opinion and to be honest about it. But you also have to be cognizant of not bulldogging people down in the process. You have to do it in a way that joins communities rather than tears communities apart. And I think that's especially prevalent right now.
Completely agree. Melissa, what about you?
I think my favorite is she was asked in an interview, when do you think, or how many of the Supreme Court justices should be female? And at what point are there enough women on the bench? And she just point blank said, when there are 9. And, an all female Supreme Court, why not? 9 men is totally fine. Nobody questions that. But why 9 women? Why is that such a weird concept? And that was kind of mind blowing for me. Because I was like,
But seriously, like everyone's like, oh, that'll never happen. Like that there's just no way in this lifetime. And I'm like, why? I mean, there was 9 men on it forever.
Yeah.
And now we're just getting to like 50-50, sort of. I think she's totally right. When there are 9, that's super cool and really awesome for like females in the legal world to think about that. And obviously just like picture that photo, right? When they always take the photos of all the justices each year. It's really interesting. What is one question you could ask RBG if you could? If any of you saw my social media posts on Instagram when she passed, that question that everyone asks you, like if you could hang out with somebody for lunch or over coffee, one person dead or alive, who would it be? My answer has always been RBG. I think she's the most fascinating person. And so if I could sit down with her right now, I would ask her, what is the one petition to the Supreme Court that you wish you would have taken as a case through the writ of cert process? Because as we talked about in this episode, thousands and thousands of cases come through the Supreme Court and you have to have a majority that agrees with it going through the cert process. And so then they review the lower court's decision on that case. And so there's got to be petitions where she was like gunning for that. She was like, we have to answer this question. It's so pivotal in con law. And I just want to know like what that one was that she wishes would have gone through. Because ultimately what happens is if it doesn't, then the lower court's decision stands and the appeal process is over. And so very, very interesting. I would love to know what she would say in that. What would be one question you would ask, Melissa?
I think I would ask her where her motivation and her drive came from to just keep pushing forward. Like what was in her mind when she was in law school and she was just getting all these doors shut in her face? And was it just, she's trying to overcome all these no's and that just kept driving her? Or like, where did that strength come from?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have no idea. I don't have that much strength in my being. Yeah. She did. She was a little lady, but she could do basically everything.
Mm-hmm.
Taylor, what about you?
I'm going to round this serious question group out with an absolutely unserious question. And I just want to know what her favorite caller was. Like, we all know, like, the notorious dissent one. Like, if she had to pick one, like, we all know a couple of them. And, like, I just want to know if she got to pick just one, what it would be. Because some of those, I've Googled them, and they're pretty freaking cool.
Her callers.
Where does that come from, too? Bouncing off of that, like, where did that idea come from? Where she was like, I'm going to put on these collars when I dissent, and I'm going to have a whole bunch of them to fit my mood.
So I totally Googled it. And part of it was that, like, the justice robes are dipped down in the front to show a tie.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're made for men. And so her thing is like, well, I'm not wearing a tie. I have nothing to show. So boom, here's a collar for you.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
There you go. And I love it. And I love like the blatant like femininity of it. And that's what I want to know. I want to know what her favorite one was.
That's a great question. I want to know too. So I'm glad you asked it. We will know one day. All right, let's wrap up this episode. It's gotten kind of long, but I think it was really interesting to just bounce back and forth and talk about RBG's life and everything that she did for, multiple glass ceilings that she broke throughout her lifetime. And I just want to end this with thank you, Melissa and Taylor, so much for being here. It was wonderful to chat back and forth. I love how we kind of got into elections a little bit and voting and why it's so important and other ways that your vote can be incredibly impactful. I'm going to end with what Justice Roberts said. I think it is a really poignant quote on RBG's death and what occurred. He said, "Today we mourn, but with confidence that future generations will remember Ruth Bader Ginsburg as we knew her, a tireless and resolute champion of justice. And I hope as we move forward, there are more and more champions of justice, just like RBG, just like Justice Roberts said." So everyone, thank you so much for tuning in, and we will have another episode here in a week or two. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Legal Paige podcast. See, I told you being legally legit isn't so scary. Be sure to visit thelegalpaige.com for all show notes. And it would be super awesome if you could head over to iTunes and leave a review. Last but not least, don't forget to join my free Facebook group for unlimited legal and biz Q&A. Chat soon, Legal Pagers.